Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry. Today's video is going to be my review of the new summon showcase, The Hunt for Harmony. Now this is a water focused showcase with the adventurers at 5-star having stun res, so it's perfect for the ongoing facility event if you are having trouble with that. Thankfully this event appears to be significantly easier than ones we've had in the past, and while I can't speak for everyone, I will say it wasn't too hard to clear out the Master Challenge battle, even with my facility level at 10. So that gives you a lot to consider of whether this is actually worth summoning on or not, and it's going to last until April 12th, so you do have some time to make a decision. Now this showcase is not seasonal, it's not limited time, so if that is a concern to you, despite everything here having a sort of Easter theme or a holiday theme, this is not a seasonal showcase. Everything here will be part of the normal summoning pool going forward. And as usual, with the new showcase comes a new giveaway, so alongside the Dream Special giveaway, I am starting a smaller giveaway that's going to be a little shorter in duration for this particular showcase. So both those links are in the description below, and of course, as usual, timestamps are on screen now, and we're going to begin right away with the Wyrmprints. This time around, there are only 4 Wyrmprints, and it looks like they're continuing a tradition where instead of 2 5-star Wyrmprints, we have 2 5-star adventurers. We'll have to see how long that lasts. But first up, we have our 3-star focus Wyrmprint, the Tiny Dragon Yadas. And this is a really cute Wyrmprint. I enjoyed the event story and I would love to have this just as a collectible. However, the abilities themselves are actually not so great. So water skill haste going up to 5%, fairly marginal benefit for most adventurers. It's really hard to actually assess how much that matters in general because for some adventurers 5% may push them past a cutoff where it actually makes it easier for them to combo into their skills. But generally speaking, because this is a 3-star, the stats are low enough that you really don't want to keep this except as a collectible. And for that second ability, the Paper Mache, especially with dual Wyrmprints, these grinding abilities are quite helpful for the facility event now. So that would be my main consideration with this. Hang on to it for the event and possibly sell it in the future if you can bear to part with its cute artwork. As far as comparisons go, there are some other sources of skill haste at higher rarities, and these have more general uses and are generally better prints with higher stats. So both of the ones I've shown here are 5 stars, Jewels of the Sun and Heralds of Hinamoto. When these are fully upgraded, both of them will provide 5% skill haste or more, as well as other abilities and generally higher stats, so I really think that is where you're going to want to invest your resources, not into leveling up a 3-star like this. Now the second new Wyrmprint we got is a 4-star, and this one is called Egg-Shaped Dreams. Once again, I have to commend the artwork on this. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's really cute artwork of Fleur and Cerise. This Wyrmprint has the HP 70% equals defense ability, which is fairly rare. This was a premium ability until this print came around. We only really saw this on the 5-star Wyrmprint that was limited time from last Christmas, A Wish Upon the Yule Tree. So this is a fairly sizable chunk of defense. And with dual Wyrmprints, this is an ability that I like to see more of in the pool just so that we can mix and match a little bit better. Unfortunately, the thing I don't like about this Wyrmprint is that the stun res only goes up to 20%. You really want multiples of 25% as a sweet spot, since that's what adventure abilities appear in. They appear in multiples of 25%. So 20% won't take someone up to 100% who couldn't get there already. And it is a little better now that we have dual Wyrmprints since both slots could provide 20% stun res and then push you over the top, but I don't really see that as a good selling point for this print. I think the best use of this print might be to meet an HP check for High Midgard Stormer. As compared to something like Armor's Aspirations, the defense will be useful for more of the fight perhaps because 70% is an easier cutoff to meet than full HP depending on how you're playing in that fight and what your healer is doing, and the stun res will at least provide some marginal benefit of, say, blocking the stun on a random dash attack from Midgard Stormer, or maybe blocking the stun from a tornado if your character has some stun res built in but not 100%. So in that sense, I could see this being somewhat useful. But otherwise, once again, this is more a print that you would keep for that grinding potential in the event. I think it's not the greatest Wyrmprint though, and I'll compare it to Trove of Knowledge and Saintly Delivery. Both of these provide stun res of 25% along with another ability. Trove of Knowledge has win res, so if meeting an HP check is your concern and you just need 5%, you could go this route and you don't need this other Wyrmprint for its 8% at 70% HP. And for Saintly Delivery, if you just want that stun res, this one provides skill damage, so it enhances your offensive potential. Both of these, I think, are better than this Wyrmprint. And unfortunately, that's true of the next Wyrmprint we're going to look at as well, Sisters of the Anvil. Now, this is an existing print, but it was given a rate up for the showcase. And just like with Egg-Shaped Dream, Sisters of the Anvil has stun res of 20%. Now, the first ability is definitely more interesting. It's strength double buff of 8%. However, there are some better options for strength double buff now, both at 4-star and at 5-star, and like I just mentioned, there are better options for stun res. So I'm not as excited about this Wyrmprint as I once was. I will say this does have some really nice artwork of Ramona and her two sisters. I love the artwork, but I'm not as excited about it. For comparison, I'll show you the other two Wyrmprints that have strength double buff. The 4-star is a recent Wyrmprint, First Rate Hospitality, and that also gives you strength when your HP is above 70%, which is more generally useful than stun res, unless you're specifically using this in a stun context and you don't have 100% stun res. I think First Rate Hospitality is actually a pretty good 4-star Wyrmprint. And otherwise, if you have access to it, Valiant Crown is by far the best Wyrmprint with strength double buff. Skill damage of 25% is no joke. It is the best you can get outside of a weapon-specific print, and it contributes significantly toward the max total for dual Wyrmprints of 35%. That is a great print to me, and I think that's actually one that could be well worth unbinding these days, because in fights like High Mercury, where there's characters like Galaranzel and Lowen, defense buffs are probably gonna fly around pretty frequently. So in the end, I think this Sisters of the Anvil print is just outclassed by the other strength double buff Wyrmprints these days, or by the other stun res Wyrmprints if that's the reason you were hoping to get this. Now we're going to move on to the final print for today, and this one excites me a lot as someone who loves to use bow units. So of course, it's called Forest Bonds. Bow skill damage of 30% is the base ability, and if you max unbind this goes up to 35%. The second ability, which can be used on any adventure, is Striking Haste of 8%. When refined fully, it goes up to 10%, and then of course this will also help with your exploration grind during the event itself. Now obviously this Wyrmprint is only really optimal on a bow unit. I don't think you want to be using this just for that striking haste. That would be pretty underwhelming. But on a bow unit, being able to reach the cap of 35% skill damage across both your Wyrmprints using just one of your two slots is pretty significant. It means that your other Wyrmprint can be dedicated to a high dragon resistant print. It could be used for something like a flurry print. There are all sorts of abilities that you could use, a strength focused print. So I think this is very powerful, best in class for bow units, similar to something like the Shining Overlord. Although I think Dragon's Claws is generally better than Striking Haste, so I still think that ranks above it as far as these weapon-specific Wyrmprints go. But for the Striking Haste, I will say, generally speaking, for bow units, you want to do a full 5-hit combo, or maybe a 4-hit combo and a 4-strike. The 5-hit combo builds your SP faster, but the combo with the 4-strike does more damage. So that's the trade-off you face. If you have Striking Haste, that gap narrows, and suddenly you're getting a pretty good amount of SP by doing that combo with the 4 strikes while maintaining that extra damage. So unfortunately, outside of the context where you're fighting one boss and it's being baited well by a melee character, Striking Haste is not great on bow units. I find that their 4 strikes are kind of hard to land, but it does fit well with the kits of some particular units like Hawk and Nefaria from the game's initial release, since their kits do depend on them using 4 strikes fairly frequently. Overall, just the skill damage alone is reason for me to want to pull this print for someone like my Eleonora. The striking haste is just a bonus, so this excites me because that's a weapon type I like to use. I've invested heavily into my bow dojos, but I wouldn't say this is one that is actually worth pulling for or necessarily worth going for. If you just have a generic 25% skill damage print, or one of the better ones like Valiant Crown, Heralds of Hinamoto, or Resounding Rendition, then you definitely don't need this. It just pushes you over the top even further. It is definitely a want rather than a need. So looking at all of the Wyrmprints overall, I am pretty unimpressed. Despite my personal feelings toward forest bonds, I don't think it's worth summoning for most players. I don't think it's anything worth going out of your way for. The one note I will say is, because of the double drops and double rupees events that are happening right now, the extra grinding prints actually look a little appealing. Being able to finish the event using less stamina means more stamina and more honeys that you could put into those double drop events. So that is one strategic consideration to make, probably most relevant if you're a more enfranchised player, but that is one reason I might actually want to summon early on this showcase, just because I know I want this Wyrmprint, and having that extra grinding opportunity could help me out in the event. Now we're going to move on to the dragons, starting with the 4-star. This is a returning dragon. It is focused on strength, and its name is Vojanoi. So there's really not a whole lot to say about Vojanoi. Vojanoi is an okay dragon. He's pretty average. Water has some really powerful tools. They have Poseidon, they have from there Leviathan, and they have Dragalia Jeanne d'Arc, and now they have Simurgh, who arguably can contribute through her Overdrive Punisher in a de facto manner as providing strength. So Vojanoi has some tough competition at 5-star, but basically because there's no freebie or welfare water dragon who enhances strength, he still has a pretty good role to play, and if you don't have a water strength dragon, if you just have Mercury and possibly Penglai, then this will probably be a good pickup for you. One copy might be all you need based on the difficulty of this facility event. I think that would be plenty, and you might not even need that, honestly, depending on who you have in your roster. To give one compliment to Vojanoi though, I do like his attack pattern, Relentless Torrent. It hits in a line and pillars of water shoot up. Depending on the hurt boxes on certain raid bosses, like if they have multiple parts in a line, this can hit multiple times, and so that is one context where Vojanoi is kind of good. Unfortunately, Leviathan, Dragalia Jeanne, they're also really good, so if you have some of those dragons and you're not really lacking on your water team, I think that Vojanoi is probably going to be superfluous for you. The second dragon that we get is of course Simurgh, the new dragon on this showcase. She gives 40% HP once upgraded and 30% at base. We also found out that her Overdrive Punisher starts at 40% and goes up to 60%, and it looks like her Rainbow Bubbles isn't a huge heal like we see on Phoenix, which is even better on Phoenix because she also provides regen, but it's a smaller heal. It's a heal that we also see on Cupid, so still sizable. It can still help your team out in a pinch, and that attack, Rainbow Bubbles, does damage, so it's a very good attack. It's a very good skill. That's probably the highlight of this dragon in my opinion. I still think that the HP and Overdrive Punisher ability combination, it's probably better than a 60% HP water dragon would have been, because like I said in my preview analysis, at some point you have enough HP, and I think Thaniel with dual Wyrmprints now, he is a very apt healer for Hilda, and that's the hardest flame content in the game. So I think that this is actually probably a good thing. At least the Overdrive Punisher means some amount of incidental damage. If you think of fights as having 3 parts, Overdrive, Break, and Normal, I would say Normal is probably 50%, Break is probably 10%, and then Overdrive is probably 40%. Using that rough estimate, if you're getting a 60% damage boost for 40% of the fight, that's actually not too bad. That's like 25% strength. You could think of it that way. And so I think that Simurgh is most comparable to Poseidon. Poseidon is going to give you more stats overall, but Simurgh actually provides more healing since her stats are skewed toward HP. It's very close though. It's not a really significant amount of difference in their healing. Basically, I think these are both good dragons for a water healer, and I think they're pretty interchangeable. So if you already have Poseidon, I don't think you necessarily want or need this dragon, but I am glad to see it gives us yet another option. So if you haven't managed to pull a water HP dragon and you're using Peng Lai on your Thaniel, this could be an upgrade. Or if you have Poliahu but don't want to invest into it, but you really like Submerg for whatever reason, this is still a pretty good dragon, a fairly good HP dragon, and I think with that Overdrive Punisher, you can really think of this as like a mixed strength and HP dragon more than a pure HP dragon, and that is not a bad thing at all. So Submerg, I would be happy to pick up. It depends on who you're planning on running. I don't think that for a strength-focused adventurer, she's necessarily great, but she could probably be okay on a ranged-focused adventurer if they are somebody who is focused mainly on team buffs or team utility. So perhaps that'll be the case once we look at Laranoa. I still would say this is mainly used for Thaniel and possibly Ricard, although Ricard can just run strength dragons. So I am not crazy about Submerg, but she is pretty good. She's pretty solid. So similar boat to Vojinoy, both of the dragons seem to be quite okay this time around. Now we come to the adventurers, and on this showcase, as I mentioned, we have 2 featured 5-stars and only 1 featured 4-star. And our featured 4-star this time is Fleur. She is a light dagger. So if you are trying to get your water team up through this showcase, and you're not looking for Vojinoy, you're not mainly looking for a dragon, it is worth considering whether it's even worth it, because you'd be pretty much trying to go for one of the 2 5-star adventurers or the 5-star dragon. So I think that's a bit unfortunate if you are struggling with the event for whatever reason, but Fleur herself looks really cute, really adorable, so I'm not unhappy to see her here. And she gives Curse Res a new weapon type, daggers. We haven't had a 100% Curse Res dagger so far, so let's go ahead and get into her kit. Fleur's first skill is Captivating Canvas. This deals light damage to enemies ahead and inflicts paralysis, and it has a skill shift mechanic. So once it connects, the phase shifts. In the second phase, you have a higher chance of inflicting paralysis. It's a 160% chance, so unless something completely resists paralysis, this will likely affect them. And then in the third phase, you also heal all allies with 30% recovery potency. So that's the same amount of recovery potency that we just saw on Submerg. It's not insignificant. It's a kind of nice heal, and there's no range limit on this heal either. It heals all allies. Now, Pallet Punch has a very interesting interaction with this, since it immediately readies the Captivating Canvas skill for use and increases the user's strength by 25% for 5 seconds, just long enough to basically throw out that skill. This is a very interesting combination to me. You could easily have this play out where you have both skills charged, you use Captivating Canvas first, and then you use Pallet Punch and you immediately get your Captivating Canvas back to throw out the next phase of the skill. I see this as very powerful, especially with Skill Haste, and that happens to be the first ability on Fleur. She has HP of 70% equals Skill Haste. Then of course she has her Curse Res, and as I said, this is a nice asset to her just because we presume this will be relevant against High Zodiark, and we didn't have a dagger with 100% Curse Res. We only had Irfan with 75% as a 5-star, but as a natural 3-star, he does seem to be quite a bit weaker than her. Now, the ability she gets as a 5-star Paralyzed Punisher is good, but it's very dependent on whether her first skill will actually be able to paralyze the enemy. When it is able to paralyze the enemy, this is great, since it seems like she'll cycle through that skill very quickly and be able to activate it multiple times, actually get to take advantage of Paralyzed Punisher for a pretty long duration, a pretty long chunk of time, if you're able to keep that up. Overall, I really like Fleur's kit. I really think it's pretty synergistic. I'm curious to see how it plays out with the combination between her first and second skill, but being able to cycle that quickly and keep having that healing, as small as it may be, that has a lot of potential to me. There is a lot of opportunity there to aid your teammates. It's a small heal, but done enough, that could make a pretty big difference in a fight. So Fleur excites me. We don't really have immediate content that she helps out with though. She doesn't help out with the event. She doesn't really help out with Imperial Onslaught for Shadow, since that inflicts poison primarily. I'm sure she could be used there, but she's not necessarily at her best there. And she does help with Master Zodiark, but that's not an especially hard fight unless you're newer to the game. Now, as far as building Fleur, I actually think you don't necessarily want to stack more skill haste on her. As things are, she gets off her first skill before 3 full combos, and she gets off her second skill before 5 full combos, so she has some wiggle room, and it's really hard to actually get her down another full combo set just using skill haste. Now granted, in the real world you're not using full combos, but I think just skill damage, since her kit is so focused on her first skill, would be pretty helpful. So Resounding Rendition, of course, is best in class right now. That critical rate is not irrelevant on her because of her critical rate co-ability. And for a more budget option, you could use something like Hitting the Books or Plunder Pals, which just provide 25% skill damage with no secondary ability. To round things out, you could use a 4-star you have on hand to bring skill damage up to 35%, which is the maximum with dual Wyrmprints, or you could also use something that just provides some extra strength to her. Now as far as dragons go, this is kind of curious. I actually like Liger, interestingly enough, because Liger can inflict paralysis, and his extra HP can be helpful for her if one of the reasons you're using her is for that skill where she actually heals the teammates as part of the loop. So I think Liger could be interesting. Otherwise, you want to go for as much damage as you can, and so in that case, you probably are looking at Cupid. Gilgamesh is another fine alternative, of course. Now, as far as teammates, Albert and Luca are the other two light adventurers who can inflict paralysis, so I think these would be great with her Paralyzed Punisher ability. She only has that at 5-star though, and Luca and Albert don't have 100% curse res, so something to keep in mind, they might be more suited to different types of teams unless you're able to patch that up through Wyrmprints. And finally, when it comes to weapons, unfortunately the 5-star Light Dagger has a 5-second strength buff. It's a really small strength buff. I don't even know if you can cast this and get off her first skill in time. You probably can, and that's about it. Now granted, you could stack this with her second skill if you have enough time to cast both, and then use her first skill and have it be immediately ready. The 4-star has another cool attacking skill. It would make skill damage more relevant on her, but of course the stats are going to be weaker on that 4-star Nightbreaker. Overall, I really like Fleur as a character. Her design doesn't have a lot of complexity, but having the ability to immediately charge her attacking skill, I feel like she's going to be able to cycle through it pretty quickly, and hopefully if the enemy she's facing is susceptible to paralysis, she will be able to really shine. If that works against High Zodiarchs, she could be a very good unit to use against it, but as of now, she doesn't really have too exciting of a purpose. I don't think she's necessarily a reason to pull. Alright, and now we come to the 2 5-stars on this showcase, and we're going to start with the existing one, Xander. So if you aren't aware, Xander has to be one of the strongest general purpose adventurers in the game. His kit is very synergistic. He has an attack type sword, he has 2 attacking skills that charge relatively quickly, and his first skill scales in power for every buff he has. Now that combos with his first ability, Striker's Strength, since that applies permanent buffs to him, up to 5 buffs of 6% each that he gets for defeating enemies with Force Strikes. And that's even easier for him than it is for other adventurers because his Force Strike damage is boosted by 50% with his last ability. This guy is a machine at taking down facility events. All of those random waves of mobs, he eats them up. And that Force Strike plus 50% will also eat up the overdrive gauge of enemy bosses that you face. It is so strong that he and Albert have a different combo to do the most damage compared to other sword units. Other sword units want to do 3 attacks and a Force Strike. He wants to do 2 attacks and a Force Strike. Basically, he wants to do a lot of Force Strikes. So Xander is an incredible unit, really easy to build too, with 2 attacking skills, Force Strike mechanics, anything that favors those will be good on him. If you don't have him, this could be a good chance to pick him up if you really want him. His one weakness might be that stun res because it makes his life harder in Hybrid Hilda, but he can still be used if your team knows what it's doing. It's just going to be harder to do in a public lobby. As far as building Xander, like I mentioned, I think skill damage is a way to go, as well as Force Strike damage. So for a budget, Fresh Perspective is a great Wyrmprint to have on him. If you have access to it though, I think the Shining Overlord is best in class for sword units, that 35% skill damage in 1 slot, plus the Dragon's Claws, which will sometimes be relevant in longer fights. If you were to combo that with Stellar Show, in my opinion, that's basically the strongest build you can have for Xander, because that critical damage is just an extra, and you're basically hitting the cap through 1 Wyrmprint each for Force Strike damage on Wyrmprints and skill damage on Wyrmprints. So that is my favorite combo for Xander, and that critical damage becomes relevant when we talk about dragons, because Xander will want to use a Water Strength Dragon, and one of those options is Dragonule Jeanne d'Arc. With Stellar Show, he has critical damage in his Wyrmprints, and that means Jeanne Jeanne d'Arc's critical rate is actually going to be quite good on Xander. Otherwise, I think Leviathan is the strongest choice, but if you don't have access to that, you could rely on Poseidon or even Vojanoi for Xander, and that would be just fine too. In terms of teammates, the main thing to consider is you don't want Xander to be controlled by the AI. So if you're in solo, you don't want too many teammates that have complex mechanics that also rely on force strikes or using skills in a certain order. You want pretty self-sufficient AI because Xander is true to his nature best as the leader because that's when he can actually use most of his kit. So I think some good teammates for Xander would include Elisande because she has such a rapid buff that increases Xander's strength but also contributes to his Majestic Tide skill. Another teammate that I like for him is Karina. Karina has a similar mechanic, so she fits well into a core team that wants to be throwing out strength buffs. She does have a defense co-ability that can help with his survival, and both of them have 100% stun res, which can't be said for Elisande. Now finally for weapons for Xander, you could go either way. You could go with his 4-star or 5-star elemental sword. The 4-star should be thought of as a budget option though. The healing it provides is fairly small in terms of the benefit. It's not great. It might help him occasionally depending on his Wyrmprint situation, but Xander doesn't have any abilities that depend on being at a high HP. So in that sense, this isn't that useful to him. The 5-star weapon, in contrast, it just has another attacking skill. That is exactly what Xander wants to have access to, so I think that's the superior choice. Now we finally come to the new 5-star adventure on the showcase, probably the reason a lot of you are tempted to summon Laranoa. So we got a little bit more detail about her through the story. Pretty fun character. I enjoyed her interactions with the gang, with Luca, and with Silas, who sadly is not on the showcase. But Laranoa is a water bow, just like Xander, 100% stun res. Unlike Xander, she is a support type rather than an attack type, and she does have a very high HP stat. It's probably in the top 5 or just about there as far as the whole game. However, her strength stat is on the lower side. It's not that high. It is good though. It's a natural 5-star, so it's still going to be pretty good. Now, Laranoa's first skill is Vivid Volley. It deals a lot of hits of damage to enemies in a line. It really sends out a volley, true to its name, of arrows straightforward with a somewhat wide radius. And then her second skill is Hunter's Intuition, and this is going to buff nearby allies' strength and their skill gauge fill rate. Now, I've put the SP costs here just to have more information and more detail, but also because I think it's relevant in the analysis of Laranoa. Hunter's Intuition is pretty slow to charge. It's similar to the cost that we see on Cerisa's second skill. So for such a long to charge buff, I think the 10-second duration really hurts Hunter's Intuition. My feeling is the buff itself is quite powerful, but with only 10 seconds and it taking quite a while to build up this skill again, even with that 20% skill gauge fill rate, I don't think this is as good as I had hoped. That being said, the rest of Laranoa's kit is good though. The hits equals critical damage. If you have access to increasing her critical rate through your dragon or through your Wyrmprints, that critical damage will add up. That's actually pretty good. Hits are pretty easy to accumulate as a bow user, and then skill damage of 30% is good. And remember, the Wyrmprint limits, like 35% skill damage, those only apply to Wyrmprints. That doesn't apply to anything in the character's innate kit. That is only a Wyrmprint thing, so you can still use a skill damage Wyrmprint on her and get 35% more skill damage on top of this. So ultimately, I think Laranoa is a good adventurer. Her skill damage, similar to what we see on Dragalia Nefaria, just a little bit more. Her first attacking skill, also similar to what we see on Dragalia Nefaria. It's a basic attacking skill. And then her second buff, once again, a slow to charge buff. So really, if you have Dragalia Nefaria, I think you really don't need Laranoa, and Dragalia Nefaria is better for the end game because of her burn res, if you are running in public lobbies at least. Laranoa though, that first ability to me is what makes her stand out. I think that's probably better than the Flurry Freezer that Dragalia Nefaria gets as a 5-star, since not all enemies can be frozen, but all enemies can be hit with critical attacks. So Laranoa right now with her stun res is most relevant for Flame Imperial Onslaught. She's not really even great for the Blazing Ghost Void Battle because that boss has range resistance, so she's not going to be able to do a lot of damage for it. I do think in High Brunhilde she could be used for some speed clears or some fast clears depending on how you use her, but that's not going to be your day-to-day thing. So once again, Laranoa is more of a luxury than a necessity. That seems to be a theme with this banner. If we're going to talk about building her though, there are some great Wyrmprints she has access to. Anything that can increase her critical rate, like Resounding Rendition, Levin's Champion, or the Prince of Dragalia would be great. Those are all pretty premium though, and one of those was time limited. Otherwise, her new bow Wyrmprint would be great just because of that skill damage. She doesn't really even need the striking haste to be that relevant. That is already going to be a good Wyrmprint just because of that extra skill damage. And at 4-star, you could look at skill damage Wyrmprints or critical rate Wyrmprints, and I think you'd have some success with either of those types of prints. For dragons, I do like Dragalia Jeanne d'Arc. I think that is the best option for Laranoa. It basically is a hierarchy with her at the top, maybe alongside Leviathan, and then Voginoi and Poseidon below. I do wonder if, like in the trailer, you could run Simurgh with her and not have it be too bad. That might be a thing if you just focus on the buff aspects of her kit, but I really think you're nerfing her pretty significantly without a strength boost because her strength is already fairly low. So as far as teammates, there are some nice options. Dragalia Cleo gives her some extra critical rate. Dragalia Cleo also has 100% stun res, so they are great teammates. They also both focus on buffing the team. And then the other teammate I like is Dragalia Xander. He also has 100% stun res, and he has some skill haste built into his kit if you promote him. That skill haste plus the co-ability on Laranoa, and even more so this Hunter's Intuition, he can charge his first skill insanely fast. So he is a great teammate to use with her, but some of his mechanics do rely more on player control, so that's probably a better thing to do in co-op than in single player. Finally, for weapons for Laranoa, both the 4-star and the 5-star bow have their merits. The 4-star has worse stats, but it does have another attacking skill. If you're using a lot of skill damage prints on her, with her skill damage in her kit, that could be quite good. Otherwise, the 5-star, just based on the stats, will probably be better, and it also enhances the user's critical rate by 20% at base or 25% once max unbound. It is a very short duration though, but if you're able to get off some combos and get your hits up during that window, that is a nice buff to have with that critical damage stacking potential she has access to. Okay, and that brings us to the final verdict on this showcase. Unfortunately, I think this is probably going to be a skip for most people. Laranoa is more of a luxury than a necessity, and I would say the same is true of Xander. It's already hard to target 5-stars as well, so if the main reason you want to pull here is for this facility event, it's not necessarily even likely that you're going to be able to get them to actually help you out. Now, if you don't have a single copy of Voginoi, I could see you making the case that this is worth pulling on, but only if you're actually struggling with the event. The 4-star Wyrmprints to me are both rather underwhelming because that stun res doesn't go up to 25%, and the 3-star, as cute as it is really only useful for grinding for paper mache. The 5-star is nice for bow users, and so unless that's your main or that's something that you love, like it is mine, there's really not a reason to pull for that either. And then we get to Simurgh, who is very interesting, but not so mechanically different from Poliahu or Poseidon that I think she's really a necessity. So I think this is a pretty low ranking banner. If I had to give it a rating, I would probably give it a 5 out of 10. I do think that the adventurers are all appealing. Fleur has some potential in the future. She's not really needed right now. The 5-stars, if you get them, are good. The 5-star dragon and the 4-star dragon are good. So there are things to like here. It's just there's not really an incentive to pull. And with this lasting as long as it does, the only incentive to really pull early is just to ease your grind in the event. So that's going to be my analysis for this showcase. Thank you so much for watching this review. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below, your analysis, as well as what you've been summoning if you decided to pull despite my review. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you next time.